Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And we're here with the first video on Book 4 of House of Chains, which is called House of Chains. But first, a quick update on the knitting. It's not as far along as I wanted it to be, and as I promised. I mean, this is supposed to be a leg warmer. It's not even like an arm thing yet. The reason for that is that I was much further along, and then I made some mistakes that I couldn't fix, so I had to start over again, which was great fun, but you know what you're gonna do? That's just life, right? Alright, so I suspect if I get some more knitting in later tonight, then I'll be done with one of those by tomorrow and the other one the day after, I guess. We'll see. I'll definitely keep you up to date on that one. But, you know, let's get into House of Chains Book 4. Cheers! Alright, so here's the thing. I said I would go back into House of Chains Book 3 with the last video today. I said that on Friday. Then I did like basically 3 days of reading other stuff and continuing with Malazan, so my brain is now in a completely different mind space, and I think I forget everything that I wanted to say. If things pop back into my mind while I'm talking today, I'll probably just add them, but I feel that's like the best way for me to go about this. I mean, I know I'm like, you know, pushing out these videos like super fast at the moment, but the fact of the matter is that I don't make notes. I just like read and then I collect my thoughts and ramble about them in the evening, which is what I'm doing at the moment. And so I need to basically be more or less at the same point in my reading as with my with the videos, unless of course I make like some in advance and planning and shit. No, that won't happen. And yeah, I'm currently not in the best, you know, frame of mind in general. I'm struggling with a lot of other stuff. I'm slowly getting better with it, and reading Malazan is once again something of a therapeutic thing for me. It's like I have some issues with anxiety or whatever when it comes to communication at the moment. By communication, I mean like all the business emails and shit that I need to actually work with and somehow let pile up, and now I'm trying to get back up to date, and it takes a lot of time and just ignoring the world and retreating into Malazan is something of a therapeutic thing there for me at the moment, which is why I spend so much time reading. And that means I'm ahead of time. So that's why we're currently at this almost breakneck speed. Although, yeah, it's not I wouldn't call it binge reading yet, because I usually have like 3-4 hours per day that I spend on this. So that's that. But this is not about me bitching about my life. This is about what I find in Malazan while I'm reading it. So let's continue with that. Book 4, we are slowly actually getting to the end of the entire thing. It's the last book, like with Memories of Ice and Deadhouse Gates. The final book in this volume is once again called like the overall volume. It's House of Chains, and things are slowly coming to a head there. More and more of our characters are actually drawing the paths of more and more of our viewpoint characters are slowly converging on Raraku, that oh so important, ever-present, like mythical, magical, holy desert that's at the center of everything in a way. And we see that happening now. We have a bunch of interesting things going on there, a bit of interesting character development going on, and some wonderful moments. Now let's look at a bunch of those. I feel the first interesting one is the plotline of the army that is not yet called the Bone Hunters, that has Tavora's army. and how things happen there. There's like two or three interesting things to look at here. The first one is, I feel, the way the whole that scorpion combat thing with Fiddler and the others, um, which I feel is interesting on a bunch of levels. Like on the one hand, it's a moment for Fiddler to shine, and Fiddler and Cuttle to shine as characters and put one over on their like friends, Gessler and Stormy mostly, all of that kind of thing. But on the lower level, and that's I guess the more important one there, is we see what you might call team building, or in this case, obviously not team building, but you know what I mean. The idea of the army as a whole, this army becoming more of a unit, and that sense of belonging being slowly built up. We know that this sense of belonging is a very, very important thing within, like, loyalty is a very important thing there, and generally the identity of these different armies within the Malazan universe is a very important thing. It's something that I guess you can also look at, like, Roman history and different Roman armies and stuff like that. But the idea of you have that's like the one who was like Dujak's army, and people who are in that army, like the bridge burners or whatever, those units, their identity and their sense of belonging is a very important thing. And the beautiful thing with the Bone Hunter army here, with Tavora's army, is that we see this army, we follow it on its entire rise. Like when we meet the bridge burners, when we meet Dujak's army in general, and the beginning of Gardens of the Moon, this is basically the end of their life cycle. The bridge burners are a living legend. They're going from the bridge burner, like their existence as the bridge burners, like they've been around. They're a living legend at this point. And we just see how that army ends in Memories of Ice. With Tavora's army, the 14th army, we see how it starts. Like we see like a more rapid rapid version of that whole, how an army becomes its own thing. We see that with the chain of dogs in Deadhouse Gates, which basically starts with that 7th army and the Wiccans becoming one union through the external pressure of the chain of dogs. Now we have a situation where those external pressures are less obvious so far, because yes, there's an engagement with Leoman and stuff like that, but apart from that, it's not like the Bone Hunters are under like constant attack and constant threat of annihilation, as is the Chain of Dogs. So that sense of belonging, that sense of we are a certain thing, that has to come from somewhere else so far, because if you don't have that at the point where the battle actually starts, it's much easier for them to break. So the identity of the army has to be built up in other ways by these small, seemingly meaningless things, like that whole Scorpion battle thing. Because it also shows us another thing, because it's also vitally important to understand that this also helps to build loyalty with those officers that understand the army and how an army, at least in Stephen Erickson's view, works. Because, you know, we have that sense that officers are dangerous because they're stupid, they don't understand, they're arrogant, they're stupid, they don't understand how combat works and so forth, because most of them are noble-born and have basically made their way into the army not because of merit but because of privilege. And that mistrust, and that is personified once again by Lieutenant Ranal in this case. But you also have those older officers that got their job mostly because of being good soldiers, like Fist Gamut in a way, or Keneb also. And it's shown really clearly in this situation how they understand what their soldiers are up to and actually take part in it. When Keneb tells Fiddler that he has invested, and that the Fist has also invested into Fiddler's Scorpion, which on the one hand shows gives Kenneth a chance to tell Fiddler that he knows what he's up to, which will make Fiddler understand that Kenneth is a rather smart and well-placed officer there. It gives him that, but on the other hand, it also shows that Kenneth understands what Fiddler is doing there with this, what Fiddler and Gessler and Borduk are doing, which is give the army something to do, something to spend their mind on, because a lot of this is just marching, and you want people to have a sort of purpose or like unified will and identity in a way. And kind of shows that to Fiddler, which will then, because Fiddler understands it, and Gessler probably also, they understand it, and that will then forge or begin to forge a trust between the officers, those officers, and their veteran ground soldiers, which also shows that, and the fact that they have known about this whole thing all along. That's the other thing there, the fact that Kenneth knew about the whole Scorpion thing all the time and let it continue, even though it's probably not perfectly within military rules, shows that he's willing to give his veterans that freedom of action that they need to actually play out their worth as veterans with a lot of experience and so forth. That he knows when to give orders and when not to give orders, which is something that is, I feel like, plays into the whole thing, how military fantasy, at least, and how military fiction portrays the whole idea of how an army should work. We see, in this case, we see how it is done well, in a way. And the fact, I mean, we still need to talk about Tavora at a different point, but at this point, she just sort of lets that thing go because she understands, but she's, for all kinds of reasons, a different person and cannot be that. She's not Dujak with like those 50 years or whatever of continuous fighting and that long-term trust that Dujak or Whiskey Jack built through over decades. She doesn't have that, so she has to take a different path there. Another interesting thing we see here about Tavora is her ability to recognize patterns and learn from history. I've said that before, and I feel it's like an important thing. The whole idea that it is vital to understand history and learn from history to avoid making the same mistakes. Now, this is obviously not big news in general, but we see her applying that. We see her like for the second time, because we have that first scene where Felicin remembers Tavora playing with soldiers and playing recreating that battle to test out alternatives to a historical battle. And now we see Tavora doing the same when Leoman and his people attack the camp. She then cites that decision and that event of Decim Ultor's, how he reacted to in that other situation. And that shows us once again that she has read history and that she's learned from history, or she knows when to apply which lessons from history. Now, obviously, there's a lot in there to unpack if you want to, and the question of how much and what we can learn from history, especially what we can learn from military history and tactics, is a different question. But it reinforces once again that her character and how she is obviously someone who knows enough about tactics to recognize when a situation is similar to another situation and then apply the correct solution. And the way how subtly this is just, once again, that you have that foreshadowing of Felicin remembering Tavora, recreating battles, and now you see her doing exactly that again. It's that great way to build characters or to introduce characters for us as readers to then connect, and it makes them look much more. This makes Tavora as a character much more powerfully crafted or introduced than if Erikson would just have given us a point where it's like, info dump wise Tavora, and she always recreated battles, and that's why she's a master strategist. Strategician, that thing, and he could have done that, and there's books and authors who would have done that. That's not how he does it. It's like he shows these aspects of her personality in small doses over like several, not books, but over several books, and thus forms that character in a more natural way, is how I would say. So there's that, which is very cool. The next thing I wanted to talk about quickly, because it kind of fits in with stuff that I spoke about on Saturday and all of that. Failure and betrayal within the Talani mass. And that's another big one. There we have that situation where Onrak talks to Monok Ochem and Ibra Golan about the renegade Talani mass, the 6 that are still left, and the idea that they turned renegade because the Talani mass have no way to deal with failure. And that is something that we see in our society as well. Something that we as a human society need to look at real hard, because we also often see failure as a sort of betrayal, or react really toxically when it comes really toxic when it comes to dealing with someone else's perceived failures. By failure I mean a lack of success in their chosen on their chosen path. And we are also rather quick to blame failure on the person who failed, and not so much on circumstances and all of that. And that's something that obviously then leads to a sense of betrayal within the person that is blamed for the failure, even though it might not be their actual they might not be the ones who actually responsible for that failure. And even if they are, that's the point there. Failure, if it's not a moral failure, that's that terrible thing that you find from a certain Protestant Calvinist perspective. This idea that failure or lack of success within within the physical world, when it comes to economic success or whatever, like in this case it's battle, but real world success or lack of success is then connected to a moral failing, which then obviously in a Calvinist sense would be connected with a lack of grace. And then you get to all that toxic shit that comes with Calvinist ethics and capitalism, which we are not going to talk about today, because this is not the rough ranting about religion class. But the point is, that's exactly what happens there. That's exactly what we see with the Talani mass and how they deal with failure. Physical failure is also connected to is also seen as a sort of moral failure, or a failure of character. That leads to a sense of betrayal within the person that is blamed, the person that failed, which might just lead to actual physical betrayal. That gives you that wonderful triangle kind of thing, basically, where you have physical failure leads to moral betrayal, leads to physical betrayal. So you go through that. Physical betrayal leads to physical failure leads to a feeling of moral betrayal, which leads to physical betrayal, which will then once again lead to the feeling of moral betrayal within those people who first blamed the person for failure. And that's a vicious cycle, as they say. And as we heard, circles are the big thing in House of Chains once again. The next one, Cutter and Apsalar end up with a boat Ain't that ironic? Um, with a boat in that storage room within Iskarol Post's temple. Like, if nothing else, at some point, Iskarol Post can open a naval museum within his temple, with all those shipwrecks that he has in cellars where they don't belong to. But yeah, that's basically what happens there. And I'm not. I mean, we don't. I'm not yet at the point where we see more of what goes on there. It's just the fact that once again another circle closes there and people return to Raraku. Basically, Raraku within seven cities is this historical black hole that just like has gathered so much historical momentum and gravity that everything always returns into that desert in a way, which is an interesting idea, an interesting metaphor. It's like this sort of hard, like super old bit of civilization. Another thing in there is we get more and more glimpses of, and this is, we get more and more glimpses of the whole history of the world, where you see there has been like empires before and before and before, and all of that with the ghosts that our good friend Calab runs into. So that's just, even while maybe not super important for the actual story told right now, it just gives that feeling of depth within the whole thing that I really enjoy. So yeah, let's look at another thing. Pearl and Lostara Yil and their relationship, which has become much more emotional of late. And this kind of goes back into the whole idea of that criticism that Stephen Erikson is not too talented or not too willing to actually write. I don't want to say talent, but that his the way he portrays romance sometimes leaves something to be desired. That's what I'm trying to say here. And I feel the portrayal of that relationship between Pearl and Lostara Yil is a very well done one. It's extremely well done. I'm not saying this is a good romance, because that's like the other thing. The question is, what do you mean by romance done well? A realistic depiction of two human beings getting very, very close, developing romantic feelings, and the aftermath of that, or if you mean a happy relationship. Because the main thing here, I feel, is with all those romances that we've seen so far, Whiskey Jack and Corlat, Minala and Kalam, now Pearl and Lostara Yil, all of this is under extreme circumstances, under extreme outside circumstances and pressures, and that has a huge impact and influence on how people behave on that interpersonal level as well, right? And under those circumstances, the type of relationship that starts out with people sniping at each other, I would say it's something of a more intellectual relationship there, even though it doesn't come off as that. Because basically you have two people who snipe and fight for dominance on an intellectual, if not physical level. Their attraction is rooted in that competition, that conflict. And that can make for a great relationship for a while. It especially also, I suspect, on the sexual level, this can be extremely powerful. Is it sustainable? That's a different question, and that's basically where I'm right now with my thoughts on Stephen Erikson's depiction of romance. Is we're not seeing average romance there, because these are not average people under average circumstances. These are people under extreme circumstances, and that has an impact. And the sustainable long-term relationship is not something that happens a lot within an army, is what I'm at least within an army that is currently at war, is what I'm trying to say there. So that's where I am at right now with this. I'm sure there was more that I wanted to talk about. I just need to reconsider, and rethink all of these things. Obviously, there's a lot more to be said about how to say, about Felicin. We're gonna get back to the Felicin and the stuff within Raraku, within Shaik's camp. We're gonna get back to that tomorrow, I guess. Also, we need to check in what goes on with our good friend Karsa Orlong, and all the other stuff that I just didn't mention for today. I'll gonna put up tomorrow, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow. So I'll leave you with this, and I'll talk more about House of Chains tomorrow. Until then, cheers.